and I am very, very glad to introduce Professor Gino Roncaglia. He's professor in the University Roma 3. Sorry. Professor in the University Roma 3 of Italy of Digital Humanities, Philosophy of Information and Digital Publishing. He's author of numerous books and academic articles in the fields of the history, of logic, and of digital humanities and digital publishing. He's also a member of the Laboratorio Scuola that is conducted from our broadcast channel, RAI, and he has been consultant to the Ministry of Education for the National Digital School Plan. He's going to speak with us and address us with the textbook, History of a Cultural Artifact from Paper to Digital. Welcome, Gino, and I pass you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Elisabetta. It's a pleasure to be with you today, even if only virtually. I really did hope to be in Florence today. It would have been the first time after more than 2 years, but unfortunately I got COVID just last week. So not only I have to participate from home, but actually I'm confined in my room. So it's, anyhow, there were a couple of bad days, but I'm almost recovered. I'm still not completely recovered, so if there is anything less than perfect in my presentation, it will be all the fault of COVID. I will speak about textbooks, and I'm going to share with you my screen. I will speak about textbooks and learning content. I try to formulate the title of my presentation in a slightly more precise way in order to give a better idea of what I'm actually going to say. This slightly refined title could be Textbooks and Learning Content Between Granularity and Structure. I will start with a few general considerations about the debate on the future of learning content and of learning resources, a debate which is very lively. It is sometimes, it may be rather confusing or rather vague, also because of the terminology which is used. So I will try to clarify a few of the terminology I will use. I will not pretend that my use of the terms is the only one possible or the even the only correct one, but this is how I will use the term in my presentation. And I will try to clarify at least a few key concepts. I will start from the difference between learning resources and learning content. The concept of learning resources is wider. For instance, we, the teachers, we are resources in any learning process. We are not the content of the learning process. In this moment, we are using a Zoom for this connection. Zoom is a tool, is a resource which we are using for this very peculiar learning context, learning process, which is our conference. It is a tool. It helps to shape the content because the content is influenced by the kind of tools we use. And so learning resources are relevant even when they are not learning content. They are relevant in order to shape the kind of learning content that we can use. But Zoom itself, of course, is not learning content from the point of view of our conference of today. So the concept of learning content is more precise, and within learning content, we have different kinds of learning contents, textbooks are one of the possibilities, together with many other possibilities, from learning objects to MOOCs to many other kinds of learning content. What is important is to give a context for this distinction, is to remember, for instance, that it is very, very important to take always into account our learning goals, and it's obviously the learning resources we use, the learning content we use are influenced by our learning goals, and also the learning environment. The learning environment is part of the learning resources, but it's a very important component of the learning resources. Learning environment today are always hybrid. There is always, I will discuss it later, there is always a component of our learning environment which is connected to new digital technologies and with the online world. It is also very, very important to consider the kind of general infrastructures, competencies, which are an important part of any learning process, especially in schools. The quality of the infrastructures are a component of the learning environment, but also the quality of the competencies, which are both our competencies as teachers and the competencies of our students, are a key component of the context, of the setting of the learning process. It is important to have clear rules. It is important to have good policies. And if we don't have this kind of context conditions, all the learning process can be problematic. But what I will mainly discuss is the difference between two kinds of learning content. Structured, curricular learning content, and textbooks are probably the best known, the best example of structured and curricular learning content, and granular integrative learning content, which is very important. We all use in our lessons a YouTube video, a PDF file, something from Wikipedia. There is a number of learning resources or learning contents that we can use, and many of these are taken from the web, but they are granular, integrative, and in order to be used in an effective way, they need the context of structured and curricular learning content. Structured learning content, the textbook, I will discuss this in more detail in a minute, is a sort of hub today, which should allow for integrative granular content, giving it a context, so that it is always clear what we are using, why, in which context. This is a sort of landscape of terminology, but also of conceptual landscape of the kind of learning resources we will be discussing in a moment. Now, why it is so important, in my opinion, the distinction between structured learning content and granular integrative learning content. This has to do with our learning goals. But first, a couple of words about a debate which has been, for instance, here in Italy, it has been very lively in the past few years. Do we really need textbooks in a context which is so different from the traditional one? And for instance, we had a discussion in Pisa, in Italy, some 6 or 7 years ago. The Ministry for Education organized a national meeting on textbooks, in which more or less there were 3 ideas, 3 theses which were somehow presented and confronted the one with the other. The first possibility And there are people thinking that we do not need traditional textbooks anymore. The online environment is so rich, so encompassing, so full of resources, that it is a sort of liquid repository of granular resources, and having such a huge number of possible learning contents drawn from the web allows each and every teacher to shape, to use the content which is most relevant in any given context. And therefore, the idea of a textbook which is more or less the same for everybody is an old idea, which is no more required in this new, more granular, more rich and liquid environment. From this point of view, if we choose this path, I disagree with this path, but if we choose this kind of path, what we need is no more textbooks, but rather tools, platform that allow us to put together resources in the most effective way. So the platform is somehow a substitute for the textbook. This was one of the ideas which were presented. There was then another idea. Yes, we still need structured textbooks, but we the people can build textbooks. The idea of user-generated textbooks, somehow something which is connected with the general idea of user-generated content, which is so popular today on the internet. There was a number of attempts of projects which were connected with this idea of textbooks which are built together by students and teachers. And there is the idea, if you agree with this position, there is the idea that the process of building learning content and textbooks is a process which is which has also a didactical purpose. And I do think that we can work together to produce some learning content. Only I do not think that this is something which is feasible in a reasonable way for textbooks, for the most structured, organized learning content. This is very good. Produce interesting, integrative content. Produce self-generate textbooks is not so easy. And it is not so easy for obvious reasons. Building textbooks is not an easy task. It requires competencies, skills, which are also editorial skills. The more complex, the more interesting, the more rich is the textbooks, also from the point of view of multimedia content, the more competencies are needed to build it in an effective way. And the third idea, which is the idea I tend to agree with, is the idea that we do need structured, validated resources based on competent authorship and curation. The aspect of authorship, I think, is an important one, because authorship is not just a sort of guarantee, or can be a guarantee of validation, but it's also a narrative tool. Learning resources which do not have an authorship are somehow less effective even from a narrative point of view. The author is part of the story in a way. This doesn't mean, of course, that we only have to use textbooks. As I said, integrative resources are very important if there is a context in which to use them. This doesn't mean that any kind of editorial textbook is perfect. Far from that. We know a lot of examples of, in Italy, there was the tradition of the stupidari, which were collections of stupid things included in textbooks and even in editorially and validated textbooks with a strong authorship. Umberto Eco has also collected a few of those stupid passages from textbooks. So this doesn't mean that textbooks are perfect, but I think they are still needed, and they are still needed with something of the tradition in them, namely authorship and editorial curation. But the content, the way in which the content is organized, the kind of content we need, this is something which is changing. And in order to better understand how the content of textbooks is changing and why textbooks as structured tools, as structured learning content are so important, I think it is important to keep in mind our learning goals. And more specifically, the single learning goal that I think it's most important today, which are complexity-related competencies. I think this is the single most important learning goal for us today. It is different in different disciplines, in different subjects, in different ages, but the need for competencies related to complexity is very, very important. And I will make a sort of digression here. I will also switch for a moment to a different presentation, just in order to discuss this point of the relevance of structured, complex content and of competencies connected with complexity. Because, and I will switch to the other presentation for a moment. Here it is, and I will share my screen again. Okay, this is another presentation which is on different steps of the digital revolution. I will not discuss Leibniz here, even if I love the history of the digital revolution a lot, and Leibniz is wonderful to know Leibniz's idea on the relevance of the binary calculus, but we will skip to more recent times and more specifically to the age in which we started to use the internet, the web. We started to use the internet more or less as hunters and gatherers. The first tribes of internet users used textual interfaces, and I'm sure there will be somebody familiar with this kind of textual interfaces. This was a Gopher. And at the beginning, I tried to put a sort of time period from the film War Games, which was the first time in which a movie for the general public had presented the idea of using connected computers, of using something similar to the internet. Up to 1991, in this period, the connections to the internet were, there were small tribes connecting to the internet for short time periods, 20 minutes, half an hour, with dial-up modems, and trying to find something out there, trying to explore this kind of new territory, and bringing home in the cave of the computer whatever it was possible to find. It was more or less the behavior of hunters and gatherers. Everything changed with the web. At the beginning, what we call sometimes Web 1.0, at the beginning, we can somehow make a parallel between the first web and the age of the first urban settlement and of agriculture. Maybe it is not by chance that one of the first tools which were used in order to build websites, maybe somebody will remember it, were called GeoCities. And there was this metaphor of urban settlements, so that, for instance, Paris was the set of web pages of websites connected with art and humanities, and for instance, the Area 51 was the set of pages connected with fantasy, science fiction. The idea of a sort of urban settlements, the first websites were a way to start to a sort of informative agriculture in an organized way. But the concept of website was very important, and the concept of going to a website, considering a website as a sort of settlement. Then from, it doesn't matter why, I could discuss why 9/11 is a possible marker for this new age of the internet, but with the web 2.0, we switched from a situation in which we had static websites to a situation in which the information moves around, information is user-generated, there is a sort of craftsmanship in building information, and the information is generated and can circulate. Now, this, from many points of view, this is where we are today. And this age is an age of fragmented, granular content. If we think about the forms of textuality which are prevalent on the web today, they are mostly short. Emails, web pages, tweets, status messages on social networks, even Instagram stories or TikTok stories, short information. And the information is short, fragmented, just because it is user-generated in a sort of artisanal way, sort of craftsmanship. So information which can become viral, can circulate in a very fast way, but is usually short and granular. This has nothing to do with digital. The idea of the digital ecosystem, digital just means a way of coding information. We can have a tweet or a novel of 1,000 pages, and they can both be coded in digital format. We can have a 15 seconds Instagram story and a 3-hour movie, or a TV series of many hours, and they are both digital. But in this age of fragmented user-generated content, most of the content circulating on the internet is granular. And this has huge consequences on younger generations because they are used. They have a lot of competencies in quick moving from one information to another, and those are useful competencies. They are very fast in moving from one piece of information to another, but there is a problem with the kind of competencies related to complexity, vertical complexity, so to speak. What we can say is that today we have not yet reached the age of the cathedrals, the age of complex digital information. But we can see that we are moving toward more complex digital environments. Wikipedia, for instance, is an example. It is user-generated content, but it's no more content generated from single users. It's a collaborative enterprise, and Wikipedia may be one of the first examples of cathedrals, of information cathedrals in the new digital ecosystem. All the work which is done on the semantic web, on linked data, it's all going toward more complex information landscapes. This means that our students today which have, as I said, a lot of competencies on moving around in a granular informative landscape, will need in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, when they are out working, they will need competencies, even in the digital ecosystem, they will need new competencies connected to complexity. This is why I think that complexity, and I will switch back to the original presentation, this is why I need that complexity-related competencies are so important. Quickly skipping to where we were, and I am sharing the screen again. Yes. Okay. And we were here. I often use this image, which is a very beautiful illustration from an old edition of Coleridge's poems. This is a representation of Xanadu, the mythic city in the Mongol Empire, which was the summer city of the empire. And it is somehow a metaphor for complexity. Maybe you will know that Ted Nelson, who was one of the pioneers in the digital world and was the first discussed the idea of hypertext, his project, which somehow is a sort of prefiguration of the World Wide Web, his project was named Xanadu. And Xanadu is the name of, it was the name of the villa in Orson Welles' film movie. It's the name of the wonderful Xanadu 2.0 is the name of the hyper-technological home of Bill Gates. Xanadu has always been somehow a metaphor for complexity. And we need to give our students in this new ecosystem new kinds of complexity-related competencies. And this explains why we also need complex, structured learning content, and more specifically, complex structured textbooks, because granular information is not enough. It is true that somehow it mirrors the situation of the digital ecosystem today. But it is also true that granular content can't be enough if we want to give complexity-related competencies. We need to show how learning content is related, the one piece with another. What is the general framework? And this is exactly the new, I think, the new purpose of textbooks. We don't need textbooks which have everything inside them, because granular content, integrative content can be chosen and is a useful resource. We can choose according to our needs, to specific needs of specific learners. We can add granular learning content, but we need a framework. And the main purpose of textbooks is to give this framework. Now, this is still a general consideration, and what remains to explain is which kind of textbooks, how the new possibilities offered by the digital publishing can change somehow the textbooks into something different. There is a lot of discussion about digital textbooks. Are they really useful? We have some result that seems to imply that traditional paper books are more effective in a way than digital ones. This is mainly due, it would be a long discussion to discuss the relationship between paper books and digital books, but at the moment, it seems that the kind of typography, which is possible on a paper page, helps to memorize, helps to understand in a way better than the kind of more fluid and less rich typography which today is possible on digital books. Digital books needs to be flexible enough in order to be used on different kinds of digital reading devices, and this flexibility comes at a price. One of the prices is just it is more difficult to have an effective typography. So there is a problem of digital typography, and this is something that we should always take into account when dealing with digital books and digital textbooks. We should always keep remind ourselves, keep present that e-textbooks, e-book in general, are three things together: digital content, reading device, and the features of the software reading platform which is used. Each of those three elements cannot stay without the other, but the interrelationships are very important. But we should not forget that it is not just a digital content or a digital device. For instance, the software, the features of the software are also very, very important. And so in order to produce effective digital textbooks, we should always keep present and consider all these three dimensions. And there are, of course, new possibilities. The idea of augmented textbooks, multicodal, multimedia, but different codes together, interactive, hypertextual. Those are, in a way, just words. But how to make them effective? Well, it's quite strange, in my opinion. I've seen really a lot of new digital textbooks. Some of them are quite interesting. There are nice ideas. Some of them are quite disappointing, mainly for this very reason that it is not easy to build an effective digital typography. I think that the most interesting ideas are still to be used. For instance, one of the most effective tools, but it is not easy to use them well, is data visualization. This can be of useful in any subject, in any situation. Data visualization can be a very, very powerful tool. I will not show you all of this, but there is a wonderful presentation by Hans Rösling, who is one of the gurus of data visualization. You can find this on YouTube. He's showing how effective data visualization can be, and I will just very, very quickly skip through this presentation. He's using a sort of virtual Cartesian planning. On the vertical axis are life expectancy, and on the horizontal one there is income, and so that we have poorer sick people down on the lower corner and rich people up there. And what happens during the years? Those are countries, the bubbles are countries. Different colors means different continents. For instance, the Americas are yellow, Europe is orange, Asia is red, Africa is blue. And as you can see, in 1810, we were all shrinked down in the lower, with low income, low life expectancy. What happens when we animate those data? And we can see slowly, at the beginning, it's mainly Europe and North America. We have an increase both in life expectancies and in income. the First World War and the pandemic, the Spanish pandemic, you've seen that there was countries going down and then bouncing back. And what happens with the Second World War, there will be, for instance, Germany, you will see Germany going down and then going up again. We can skip quickly to the last, no, sorry, it's still here. What happens after Second World War, and you will see China, India, the ASEAN giants, which somehow move and tend to converge toward higher incomes and higher life expectancy, while of course Africa is still behind. My point is that the expressive strength of this kind of tools is huge, and we can also, for instance, take into account regions within a country, the possibilities of data visualization, and in a way, this is if we try to present this information in a more traditional way, we would have needed a 5-dimension graph, which is not easy to visualize. This kind of data visualization is hugely powerful, and it's something that we can use within textbooks in a very effective way. Today, digital textbooks, most of the digital textbooks I've seen, still have to use effectively this kind of tools. There is another example which I will give you very, very quickly, and just a moment. I have to switch back to presentation and to okay. Another example came back from the 90s. There was this small digital publisher, Voyager Company, a Canadian digital publisher. They've made a lot of interesting experiments. Bob Stein, who was the leader of Voyager Company, is the president of the Institute for the Future of the Book in London. Among the experiments they have done, there was this wonderful CD-ROM. It was before the age of tablets, which was a transposition of a book by Marvin Minsky, one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence. The book is The Society of the Mind. And the great idea they had was to put the author inside the book. They were very, very careful not to interrupt reading, so that it is only at the end of chapters or at the end of reasonings. There is Marvin Minsky, the author himself, who comes out from an image, comes out from the border of the page, walks inside the page, and discusses the text. This idea of the author inside the book is very powerful. It's a narrative tool that can be very powerful. And up to today, I've never seen anything as effective as this 1994 CD-ROM title. We have a lot of interactive books, enhanced books with the author inside. It is usually within a window. There is a small frame where the movie with the author himself. This idea of having the author moving freely in the pages of the book is very effective, and once again is something that in textbooks could be very, very effective. So there are huge possibilities in digital textbooks. I will not discuss all of them, but there are a lot of interesting possibilities. And there is another interesting possibility, that of augmented reading. Namely, we can try to build augmented textbooks. It is not easy, requires a lot of competencies, requires good idea, as we have seen, but we can try this route. We can also try to take into account the fact that today, enhanced book did not have the success that somebody predicted 20 or 25 years ago. We don't need so many enhanced books, but our way of reading, even the most traditional book, even the most traditional textbook, is changed because we have the digital environment around us. So we read something about a historic figure and we can go to Wikipedia to have more information. We read something about a place and we can move on Google and look for images or for a map of the place. We can read a reference to a music and we can go on Spotify and listen to the music. This kind of augmented reading, which is on the side of the reader, not on the side of the author and of the publisher, is something that today is quite common even when we read completely traditional content. And publishers, authors of textbooks should take into account also this possibility. We can add digital content to our textbooks, but we can also use somehow, take into account the fact that the reader will have her or his own exploratory behaviors, starting from the textbooks and working in the digital ecosystem, and we can try to trigger or to give a good direction to this kind of exploratory behaviors. This means that even traditional textbooks can be improved, taking into account the new way in which students and readers today used to read. This idea of augmented reading. I'm going toward the end of my presentation. I will not discuss with you all the problems connected with reading devices, with file formats. They are relevant, but they would take a lot of time. It's just to mention them because they are relevant. I will not discuss with you all the problems connected with the software platform, which are also very, very important. This is a component of a new learning environment, which we should always, and the experience of the COVID pandemics also strengthened this relevance of the platforms. I think that somehow we should try to move toward the idea of a sort of operating system for learning, because interoperability is so important, and it's no more a matter of putting together single tools, single digital tools. We should try to start working on a more broad idea and trying to build operating systems which are somehow made of useful tools for learning. But this also would require a lot of discussion. I just want to point to a couple of other features which could be of great relevance for the new generation of digital textbooks. Augmented reality is something that can be used, for instance, in, I don't know, physics, geography, but the idea of layered content, we can somehow think of a page as a layer on which we can superimpose other layers of content. This kind of use of the idea of layers is something that can be of great use also in the digital environment, and using in-content learning services. This is also something that we can do. The experience of the COVID pandemics, I will not discuss it in detail, but what we have done, we should always remember that what we have mainly done during the COVID emergency was using emergency distance learning, which is very different from effective blended learning. So something we were forced somehow to do during the COVID pandemics may give a wrong idea of the way to use the digital ecosystem. For instance, the idea that using online learning means using online lessons, this kind of transmissive frontal online lessons. No, we have also a lot of tools that can be used for collaborative activities. But during the emergency, it was not so easy. The competencies were probably not high enough in most of the cases to use effectively the digital ecosystem. This is something that we should learn to do in order to avoid taking the wrong lesson from the COVID pandemics. The importance of quality learning content, of quality learning environment, and there is a point on which I will close my presentation, the importance of hybrid school libraries. I'm convinced that school libraries are one of the most important learning environment. Our school need innovative working school libraries that are somehow the cultural hub of the school, the place in which we work on personal interests of the students, and new school libraries are hybrid environment. They offer physical content and digital content, digital lending, the possibility of using all kinds of different resources, but also of doing music, for instance, we should think of innovative school libraries as a place where students can explore their interests. And it is not, it may seem somehow strange to close a presentation on textbooks with a reference to school libraries, but effective learning content requires effective learning environment. And the school library is one of the most important learning environment in our schools. I will stop here. There are a lot of questions and things that could be very important to go deeper in some of the points, but I try to give a general landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Gino Roncaglia. And I guess that you have raised many questions because it was a very rich, broad and deep overview on what has happened and the new challenges for the future. Maybe I have the time to collect one question, only one, very quick. And if you still have time to stay with us, yes, there is one hand raised, and is Eric Brouillard. If you can come so he can listen, and the other that are online too can listen. It was out of the program, Gino, sorry, but I really, really appreciated very much what you presented.
So thank you. Just a question or an observation. What do you think about the idea of textbook as advanced organizers?
I think that textbooks today should have this role of allowing to organize content and even granular content, offering a sort of hub for different kinds of content. They should offer a structure, the general structure. So yes, I think that textbooks in a way today should also be organizers, but in this sense, it's not enough to give a place where to put content. You should somehow give an organized, structured place where to put content. So textbooks are not just platforms of aggregation of content. They should have their own content, their own narrative structure, their own authorship. But we don't need textbooks of 1,000 pages because it is, if a textbook is well organized, if it helps to give the structure of the content, then it is easier to connect to the textbooks also integrative external content. And the idea of a sort of learning environment of operating system for learning is also, I think, something that can help to contextualize textbooks in a wider range of tools. For instance, digital notebooks. What can we do with digital notebooks? There are a number of very useful possibilities in digital notebooks. There are a number of platforms that already offer interesting possibilities for a digital notebook, and the way to connect textbooks and notebook. Well, we have new possibilities also from this point of view. So a general learning environment, a general operating system for learning, in which we have textbooks, digital textbooks, in which we have digital notebooks, in which we have other tools that can help, for instance, search tools, collections of validated content, but with the textbooks which has and retains this function of giving the general structure of the curriculum. I think this is something which is needed, and also help to have this kind of connection between different teaching styles, different teaching situations. A common ground is required in order to retain this kind of some level of uniformity, while taking into account all the differences that there are in teaching styles, in learning styles, in learning needs, but some kind of possibility of a general common framework. I think it's important, and this is, I think, one of the most important roles of the textbooks.
Thank you.